Microsoft Flight Simulator was announced June 9th, 2019, and everyone saw it and said, nope. You wouldn't be remiss. I mean, first, it looked almost impossible. Second, it was being made by Asobo Studios, whose other game was Plague Tale Innocence. Not really a lot of crossover experience there. As gamers, we already had to live through the Watch Dogs fake trench coat lighting and basically everything world debacle. And while Cyberpunk was just a future date at that time, to be moved many times after that, that would also leave a lot to be desired on the old truth front. And then it was just out on PC, and sure enough, you did need a monster rig to run it really well. But even at lower settings, the numbers, holy shit, moments was like riding a really bad safety record roller coaster. 20 plus airplanes, no helicopters, sadly, and a billion gigabytes later, Microsoft Flight Sim was a damned good title. And if you get a chance, you can check out my review on the PC version, and it's now hit the consoles. Of course, we'll have Tribes of Midgard, Ascent, and other reviews coming up, so if you get a chance, subscribe. But let's talk about Microsoft Flight Sim because it's finally here. And for everybody else out there, the 27th, this thing is going to show up on Game Pass. Everybody's going to want to know how this translated from the PC to the console. Flight Sim is easily one of the best looking Xbox games there is, full stop. Even with some aliasing in various places, most noticeably on the takeoff and landing and in some structures. And of course, that ramshackle way that Bing Maps interpolates data and plots it down in the game world so that a boat looks like a half-sunken cylinder created from the sad stories of sailors that they have to tell each other before going out. It's the flying that matters, though. It's the wonder of terrassing through a cloud in a stunt plane or trying to retrofit your body with 4 other arms when landing a jet on a windy island runway. The game is stellar looking at the proper distance, from realistic cockpits to stunning lighting and textures. Flying over New York is a sight to behold. Paris, San Francisco, Italy, London, Australia, Florida. Okay, maybe not Florida, but all those others. For the most part, you see a game this huge, you see a game this massive that looks at most other titles and say, nah, man, here's the world. It's probably going to have some random problem somewhere where people couldn't test every single combination of speed, loading times, world design, and airplanes. And I present to you 3 FPS mode. So, one of the reasons why I test everywhere I can is because it's easy to play a game and say, hey man, this is locked here or locked there, but here and there in an open world game is about as accurate as saying tacos are lazy burritos, which is somewhat accurate, but doesn't actually tell the entire story. And I want to make sure that this is clear. Almost no other locations had this kind of situation going on. One airport in particular, taking off into that seamless blue sky of memories and futures yet unlived, came crashing down to earth. The only way to fix this kind of issue was to not take off from there. Reboots, deleting the rolling cache that you can set up in this game, none of that worked. It was very particular to those airplanes and that one particular airport. However, that's one airport out of thousands. Though I do need to say that if I found that one, you might see some others popping up in reviews coming out this week. I did continue to troubleshoot this and never found that experience anywhere else though. The trouble spot aside, what you have here though is a mostly 30 FPS experience at 4K on the Xbox Series X and 1080p on the Xbox Series S. You have some drops depending on locations, but nothing that actually impacts gameplay except for that one location. There's no graphical options in this game to really speak of, unless we count turning off Bing Maps and other features, which, by the way, I suggest against. Despite those issues, the game is breathtaking to experience. It is simply one of the best looking games I have ever seen, even though when you fly over New York, it looks a little bit like The Last of Us 3, where all of a sudden you see trees and shit growing in places they probably shouldn't. It does bring me to one huge point with this game, though. It needs the internet connection to even look remotely its best. Here it is without it. And here it is with all the online settings on. Listen, you just got to know what you're expecting from this game and what it's trying to deliver to you, which is the feeling of being inside of those cockpits at any one time, taking off from places you know, places that are familiar, places that aren't, landing in places that you know or that you, well, aren't familiar with, or just crashing into something on accident because you forgot to do the flaps right. It is a phenomenal simulator experience if you understand what those kind of titles are trying to deliver. One of the most impressive console games I have ever seen graphically. On the other hand, when you look at sound, music, and voice, which I covered in the other review, I would say it's very good. The sound inside the cockpits is accurate. The sound outside of them is pretty accurate if you're hanging outside of an airplane for dear life. And the voices are usually AI, handled via an AI speech algorithm that actually works pretty well to mimic your different radio calls. All of that works fine. The music I really do like. It's a very serene, very laid back, almost an Austin Wintory kind of just sort of sit back and let the world sink in, almost main menu music when you think about it. It's not going to be for everybody, and many times it sort of peters out and goes away and then cycles back. I liked all that. Gameplay, though, is going to be what matters here. So Microsoft Flight Sim starts you with a number of tutorials, as well as the ability to free fly and discover locations. Let's talk about the tutorials first. You run through basic steps like starting the engine and taking off, landing, taxiing, reading the instruments, and climbing up the complexity chain the further you proceed in these. These are pretty good tutorials. They're not excellent. There are some gaps, but overall, they let you learn what you need to learn, and there's also some free flight in some of them at the end, which lets you sort of test out other skills or just sightsee. Flight Sim is what it sounds like, though. While there are various trials that you can do, as well as the discovery tours, which take you to touristy locations like Central Park or San Francisco. It is not called Plane Pilot Simulator, where you jump in a plane, you're a pilot, you have to taxi on and off with a bunch of people on board, pissy about everything. There are no people on board, and there are no real actions or missions like that. So be prepared. If you're somebody who comes from a Euro Truck Simulator kind of thing, where there's all these deliveries and stuff to do, it's not exactly set up the same way. And speaking of Euro Truck, where a lot of people will grab their old steering wheel and strap it to their desk, the game does work with mouse and keyboard on the Series X and S when it comes to the instrumentation. You can do everything with the gamepad, though, and surprisingly enough, with some adjustments, it actually worked incredibly well. Flying itself, there's no issues, of course. When it comes to the gamepad, there are some more arcane bits on complex planes that can be a little bit daunting at first. It uses the left and right bumpers as modifiers, and once you sort of understand that and identify what they're thinking of, then it's not that hard to figure out where the majority of different instrumentation may lay. However, I don't demand my United Airlines pilots suddenly use a friggin' Xbox One controller. And the reason is probably because landing at complex airports or flying in insanely difficult conditions will test your ability to bounce around between hard lock location screens as well as some soft locations for instrumentation. There's a reason that most F1 racing wheels look like a Star Trek command console, because there's a lot of shit to do. No amount of shortcuts or modifier buttons is going to magically replace hitting the bracket key for simplicity. So be aware of that. You ever gone driving with a grandparent and half of the way there they forget where they are, where they're going, or where you are, or who's in the fucking car? That's a little bit like the AI in this game. If you want to take off or land or just fly around, you can turn the AI flight system on. You can pick a couple parameters for how it's going to work. Takeoff, it's not so bad. It does a pretty excellent job, but it can be very confused when you're flying to a one-place destination and you take off and fly for a bit and then let it take over. It has that grandpa moment where you have to sort of push them along because it can ramrod you, fly around for a bit, and then remember it was going to the store, not from the store, and will turn back towards your destination. That can lose you a lot of time as well as some gas. At any time, you can easily take over or give back control. Now, at any time, you can also pick various destinations, key sightseeing spots, and the game will fly you there or point you to it if you want to do so. Simulator games, especially like this, there's absolutely no weapons at all other than a confident ego in a situation you have no excuse being in. It's just you and the sky. You do have the challenge missions. These are okay. There's nothing great at this time, but it puts a bit of a cage around that squirrely beast of a sim game that we all experience. It so far doesn't have a real mode in it, though, that says something like, get these 150 passengers home with half your systems dead, like Kurt Russell. Also, I did run into some issues. The game took my controls from my PC version, and whatever it did not work. In fact, nothing worked. I couldn't move the controller or get any options to work at all. I had to hook up a USB keyboard to the Xbox Series X and reset the controls there back to default. No matter what else I did, it would not fix that. Gameplay-wise, this is a hard title to qualify. You can spend a couple hours or hundreds of hours in it and not see remotely close to everything either way. You could spend hours exploring the areas around your home or your old hometown or another continent, or you could turn it on, fly a bit, and then just happily sit back and watch it. The game has less of a requirement and more of a resolved determination that sticks in you and asks you to go just one more flight. And in the past, full-on flight games like this, they didn't even come to the console. Or if they did, you got something where the game could have just been called Spot the Most Things That Have Been Cut from This Game Simulator. Not so with Microsoft Flight Sim. Graphically, it didn't take near the hit that I expected, and what you're left with is what I said about in the PC full review, a spectacularly sedate flyer that offers a one-of-a-kind experience, except that now it's on 2 platforms and requires like 100 gigabytes download, notwithstanding. Fun factor, the game, it's incredible on PC. It continues to be that way on console. While a simulator game may feel shallow when it comes to the typical gamified mechanics, Flight Sim's depth is in picking a plane and knowing it, much more like a fighting game if your fighting game was a simulation of smoking a giant blunt like Snoop Dogg and then streaming on Twitch for 2 hours without turning the audio on. It's laid back, but it's not carefree. It's simplified at times for sure when other games might appear more complex, but that doesn't remove its worth. Instead, it just shifts into another genre of that WTF side of Euro Truck or other emulators. While you don't have a huge list of activities, hoops to jump through, the fun here is actually not needing them. It's flying across the coastline and saying, that's my house. And if you're in luck, actually seeing your goddamned house. As you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch again rating scale. This is on Game Pass, so we're just going to say, get it or forget it. Get it for sure if you have Game Pass. If you want to go out and buy it, you can see the PC review I did. I do think this is worth buying. I think it's great. I think even with that one place, I can't even remember where it was. I think it was like Australia or London. Those two are completely separated. It was one of those places. It was some place that had the really bad FPS. I didn't see that in any other locations. By all means, check out other reviews because maybe they will point it out. But no one at all will be able to have checked all these locations, unfortunately, because there's just thousands of airports and thousands of different places. I will suggest to you that if you get this, you do make sure that your bandwidth can handle it. I played this on a wireless network at about 200, and then of course on a LAN network, which was up in the thousands when it comes to the download speed. And there was a couple stutters definitely on the wireless, but with wireless, especially with my Xbox Series X, I've never been perfectly stutter-free anyway. When it comes to the LAN cable, I didn't really notice any stutters at all. Now you do get the occasional FPS drop, which is different than your streaming stutter. Anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys like the review. Remember, we're doing Tribes, we're doing Ascent. There's other videos coming up. There's going to be a community video. You can, of course, check out the Patreon where we do all kinds of stuff, special secret podcasts, as well as D&D games, all kinds of crazy shit in there. But regardless of what you do, regardless if you get this game, I hope you have an awesome week.